Did you ever do, when you read a novel, do you ever do that? Like read the end? Sometimes, yeah. You want to know who done it, right? So, the last page. The last page. So what book is the last book in most editions of the Tanakh? Usually Divrei Yamim, Chronicles, yeah. Huh? Chronicles. So if you look, Divrei Yamim Bet, Perek Lamed Vav, chapter 36. Let's look at actually, let's look at before that 35. No, the same 36. Look at one second. Look at verse 6. Chapter 36, verse 6 in Divrei Yamim Bet. There was a fellow called Yehoiakim who was in charge. Against him came up Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and bound him in fetters and to carry him to Bavel. Nebuchadnezzar also carried off the vessels of the house of the Lord to Babylon and put them in his temple at Babylon. So this is the end of the first temple. Okay, the end of the kingdom of Judah. Yeah. End of first temple. If you look on our periods on the board behind us, we have the red period and then the orange period. So this is the end of the orange period. Usually it's described as minus 586, where Nebuchadnezzar destroys the temple. If you look at verse 17, or even that the king of the Chaldees, meaning the Nebuchadnezzar, he killed their young with the sword in the house of the sanctuary, had no compassion upon the young man or maiden, old man, and stooped for age. He gave them all into his hand, all the vessels of the house of the Lord. Verse 18, all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, the treasures of God and the Lord, the treasures of the king and his princes, all these he brought to Babylon, and they burnt the house of God. And they broke down the wall of Jerusalem, and burnt all the palaces thereof with fire, and destroyed all the goodly vessels thereof. Them that escaped from the sword carried it away to Babylon, where they were servants to him and his sons, until the reign of the kingdom of Persia. Sorry, I don't need to depress you first thing in the morning, but we're going to move on from here, because we know that from when you hit rock bottom, that's when you're able to progress and move ahead. And so this was the destruction. This was the bottom. And the Jewish people were carried away. Those who survived, those who were not killed in Jerusalem, were taken as slaves to Babylon. But then, the verse just told us something's going to happen. Nebuchadnezzar himself, the reign of the empire that was known as the Babylonian Empire, was taken over by the Persians. But first, verse 21, the destruction happened to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years, 70 years. Somehow, the word number 70, of course, is 7 times 10. 7 refers to this week's Parsha, Shemitah, as a cycle which the land is supposed to rest 1 year at the end of every 7 years. And if the Jewish people if they didn't keep the Shemitah during the 410 years, which was the first temple era, then if you add it up, 410 divided by 70, How many Shemitas is that? 7 times. It's 6, about 6, right? 420. 7 times 6 is 420, right? So there's six Shemitah cycles. Does that work out?
410 years in 70 years?
No, in 7 years. 7 years. 7 years.
60.
60, right. So somehow there's a work, it works out that 7 times 7, the cycle of 7 was not kept, and for that they were sent into exile for 70 years until the land gets back its resting. Of course, the land rested because there was nobody there to plow it. In any case, then the big revolution appeared. Verse 22. We're really getting to the end of the book. Bishnat Achat LeKoresh. The first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, the word of the Lord spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, and he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying, thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, Koresh in Hebrew, Koresh melech Paras. All the kingdoms of the earth hath the Lord, God of the heaven, given me, charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? The Lord his God be with him, and let him go up. Mi bachem mikol amo, Hashem Elokav imo v'ya'al. This ends the book known as the Tanakh with the proclamation of Cyrus that all the Jews who are in exile in Babylon, whoever wants to, can come up, go up, and build the second temple. And then they did. So obviously the Book of Chronicles is a little bit of a run through history with lots of lists and names. And we have other books in the Tanakh which pick up the story and tell us who were the leaders who actually went up. Look at the Book of Ezra. David. Your brother's Ezra. Is he engaged?
Yes.
Mazal tov. Amazing. That's exciting news. Somebody told me.
Can I go to my own Tanakh?
Sure, as you wish. Sure. Go to page 1407, the beginning of the Book of Ezra. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. It's page 1407 in this volume. Which, as I said, that's what we just ended it with, right? The Book of Chronicles, the first year of the king of Cyrus. Now that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout his kingdom and put it also in writing. Wait, this is word for word. This is the same verse. Yes?
Who wrote the Chronicles and Breita?
Hayamim.
But it sounds like from the first verse, sounds like the exact same scribe wrote it.
Exactly. Maybe Ezra himself. Yeah. I think traditional interpretation is that Ezra wrote it. Yes. Ezra. But it would be hard for it to be somebody earlier, because they would have to know by prophecy. It's possible. But anyways, thus saith King of Persia, Lord of God of heaven, hath given me the kingdoms of the earth, and he's charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Everybody recognize these verses? Exactly, word for word. This is the end. Who is there among all your people? Is God be with him, and let him go up. Here it continues. It doesn't just end up with the word go up, but he says, and him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem. Whoever so remaineth in any place, wherever he sojourneth, let the men of his place help him with silver and with gold, and with goods, and with beasts, beside the free will offering for the house of the Lord that is in Jerusalem. So the people who stay in Babylon, what is their job going to be? We just read it in verse 4. The people who stay in Babylon, what is their job going to be? to donate, ladies and gentlemen. Israel bonds, right? Send your money over to the JNF, whatever it is. There is a role for the diaspora, as it's described here. And what happened? Then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin and the priests and the Levites with them, whose spirit God has raised to go up to build the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. These are the Zionists. Okay, they went. They actually got up. Yes, and all that were about them strengthened their hands with vessels. Oh, they give them gifts. They gave them money to go and rebuild the temple with gold, with goods, and with beasts and with precious things. Besides all that was willingly offered. Also Cyrus, the king, brought forth the vessels of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar brought forth out of Jerusalem, and put them in the house of his God. Even those did Cyrus, king of Persia, bring forth by the hand of Mitridat, and he numbered them unto Shesh Batzar and Asili Yudah. So who's the leader of Judah? A fellow called by the name of Shesh Batzar. Okay? And then he gives the number of all the gold basins, silver basins that he gave. The king gave him a nice aid package for those Jews who went back to rebuild the temple. And there's a whole list of the names of the people that came up. Chapter 2, these are the children that went up out of captivity, of those which, chapter 2 now, which had been carried away, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, carried away unto Babylon, came again unto Jerusalem, everyone unto his city, which came with Zerubbabel. Here, this is the leadership. Zerubbabel, Yeshua, Nehemiah. You learned a little bit. Sraya. Eliah, right? We know Mordechai, we know from the Book of Esther.
Was the same?
Yeah, the same Mordechai.
Wow.
He made Aliyah. Some say he actually came back to Persia after he made Aliyah to be a lobbyist in the palace of the king of Persia to make sure things go right. But we're not sure exactly how this worked. But the traditional understanding is that this is the same Mordechai. Anyways, and then we go the children of Parosh, 2,000. Children of Shvatia, 372. Children of Arach, 700. We have a whole list of all of the people of Israel came up. Sum total, go to the end. What's the sum total?
It says right here.
3,000.
No, keep going. Go to, we have the camels, we have verse 64. Verse 64, the whole congregation together was?
42,360.
Good.
Aside from the male and female slaves, of whom there were 7,337. They also had 200 male and female singers. The horses, 736, the mules, 245, the camels, 435, donkeys, 6,720.
Yafe. Verse 70, the priests, the Levites, some of the people, and the singers, and the porters, and the Netanim dwelt in their cities, and all of Israel in their cities. Okay, they had a big gathering, and in the 7th month was come, chapter 3 now. 7th month was come, and the children of Israel were in the cities, and people gathered themselves together as one man to Jerusalem. Then stood up Yoshua, we mentioned his name before, son of Yehotzadak, and his brethren, the priests, and Zerubbabel, it's the first time we hear his name, the son of Shaltiel, and his brethren, and built the altar of the God of Israel to offer burnt offerings thereon, as is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. Okay, and they did lots of offerings. And verse 6, from the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings unto the Lord, but the foundation of the temple of the Lord was not yet laid. So they started off with an altar and korbanot, even before they built anything else. They gave money to the masons, the carpenters, to go to bring cedars from Lebanon, as you can see. And in the second year, verse 8 now, I'm skipping over to verse 8. Second year of their coming into the house of God, began Zerubbabel and Yeshua and the remnants of the brethren. We see who the leaders were, Zerubbabel. And they came together. In verse 10, when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, they set the priests in their apparel with trumpets and Levites with cymbals to praise the Lord after the ordinance of David, king of Israel. And they sang together, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, because he is good, his mercy endureth forever. And all of the people shouted with a great shout. They praised the Lord because the foundation of the Lord, the house of the Lord, was laid. Many of the priests and Levites were ancient men who had seen the first house. When the foundation of this house was laid before their eyes, they wept with a loud voice, and many shouted aloud for joy. Why did they cry? Why did they cry? The people that had actually seen the first temple?
It's two options. Maybe I feel like maybe it's like they cry because they are so happy that they will see a new one, or that's not the other davar as it was before.
Yeah. So we see, it sounds like it's mixed in. Verse 13 says, the people could not discern the noise of the shout of the joy of the noise of the weeping of the people. People shouted out with a loud shout, the noise was heard far off. So the weeping seems to be going against, but it was sort of swallowed up. They said this is, pales in comparison to what was the first temple. It's not the same. It's just the foundations. But those who were younger, they were all excited. This is we got a new temple. We're starting off to build a new temple. Okay, but the thing is, as you can see in the next chapter, chapter 4, not so simple. There's adversaries of Judah and Benjamin. They came to Zerubbabel and said to him, "Let us build with you." They tried to join them. And then in verse 4, the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building, hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even at the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And in the reign of Ahasuerus, they wrote unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. We've heard of Ahasuerus before, and trouble for the Jews in the time of Ahasuerus. Right, the Book of Ezra, of course, right? The Book of Ezra, right? Could be it's the same Esther, and they really made trouble. Basically, they sent a letter to Washington D.C. and said they don't let the Jews build in these territories of West Bank and Gaza. And the Emperor of the world came and said, "Okay, we won't let you build. They're going to stop the building. Don't build." And this becomes letters back and forth, politics, and then there's a fellow that turns into, by the way, the Book of Ezra switches into Aramaic. Go to, we're not going to read the whole book right now.
It's switched language to Arabic.
Yeah, switch, and
Why does it switch to
there's a good question. It's a good question.
Is there like a... Okay, Aramaic and Hebrew are very, very, very similar, right?
True.
Is there is it like it switches languages like that, or is it like it starts to blur the lines?
No, this is
Abrupt,
an abrupt switch. Yeah. Well, I think it turns into Aramaic when we're talking about the official correspondence. These letters being sent back and forth. Like, here we're in Israel, we speak Hebrew, but when we're doing politics and lobbying in AIPAC, right, the government, it's all in English, right? So the rest of the book is written in English because this is the description, but also the people, they spoke English and they spoke Hebrew together. Right, exactly. That was the lingua franca, it's called, yeah. That's the language that's used in the...
Literally means French language. But
Lingua franca has become a term to mean the
default language.
The default or the most commonly used language, yeah. Yeah. In any case, it wasn't French. No, I don't need to say that. Anyways, they're writing letters back and forth. And look at verse 24, the end of chapter 4. Verse 24, then ceased the work of the house of God, which is at Jerusalem. So it ceased unto the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So there's always stops and starts. Then the prophets, chapter 5. The prophets, Haggai the prophet, and Zechariah. Oh, okay, so Second Temple period. We're going to have to put in Haggai and Zechariah. We have them there at the end, right? Yeah, David, you wrote them up for us, right? Haggai, Zechariah, they were in the Second Temple period, but end of the first, beginning of what did they say? They prophesied unto the Jews that were in Judah, in the name of the God of Israel. And then rose Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, Yeshua, we saw the leadership before, began to build the house of the God which is at Jerusalem. And with them were the prophets of God helping them. And then there were others. And there were letters back and forth. And they started and they stopped. And they started and they stopped. And ultimately, as we know, they succeeded. And we're going to skip ahead now a couple of chapters. Let's go to chapter 7. Chapter 7, there's an introduction of a fellow, which we haven't really spoken about much yet, but it's the name of the book. Chapter 7. Now, after these things, in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra, son of Sariah, son of Azariah, son of Hilkiah, son of Shalom, son of Tzedek, son of Achid. We have a whole lineage of Ezra. He was such an important person. Son of Amariah, son of Azariah, son of Zechariah, son of Uzziah, son of Buki, son of Ushua, son of Pinchas, son of Elazar, son of Aaron, the chief priest. Oh, he was a Kohen. We're giving his lineage. What happened with this fellow named Ezra? Verse 6. Really, the book of Ezra starts here in chapter 7, verse 6. This Ezra went up from Babylon, and he was a ready scribe in the law of Moses. Fascinatingly, it turns back into Hebrew here in this description, which the Lord God of Israel had given, and the king granted him all his requests according to the hand of the Lord his God upon him. And there went up some of the children of Israel, the priests. It sounds like there was a second aliyah. He came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, I'm in verse 8, which was in the 7th year of the king. And Ezra, verse 10, you see, had prepared his heart to seek the law of the Lord and to do it and to teach in Israel statutes and judgments. Okay, and then we have a copy of the letter which he gave him. That's back into Aramaic. As I mentioned, perhaps the letters were in the Aramaic. And he said, whoever wants to go. So we have a second aliyah with Ezra. A couple of years after the early Zionist effort got stopped by the locals, who sent, who lobbied with the powers that be. But then Ezra managed, and he created up a system. Ezra got the power. Good morning. Verse 25. Skip to the next page. Page 1420. Verse 25. Ezra, after the wisdom of thy God that is in thine hand, set magistrates and judges who may judge all the people. He gave him political power, which are beyond the river, as such as know the laws of thy God, and teach ye them that know them not. Whosoever will not do the law of thy God and the law of the king, let judgment be executed speedily upon him. Gave him a lot of power to make a Torah law. Okay, you've learned these books with Rav Michael, I imagine, the Book of Ezra. But it's good just to review. You can see where I'm going. Good morning. And then there's another list of the people who were in charge. On chapter 8, we're going to skip that. Take out a Tanakh. We're in the Book of Ezra. And we have a problem with the intermarriage. There's lots of praying. Ezra prays in chapter 10. What am I going to do? How am I going to lead this people? Trying to get them to leave their foreign wives. Everybody had to gather in chapter 10, verse 9. Whoever doesn't come for 3 days in the 9th month, everybody has to come. And Ezra yells at them for taking their foreign wives. Now get rid of them, and they had trouble. And that's the end of the book of Ezra. We're up to the book of Nehemiah. Continue, sorry?
Ezra is quite a short book.
10 chapters. 10 chapters. That's it. We just read the whole book of Ezra. Aren't you sorry you're late, Ariel? Shame. We finished the whole book of Divrei Hayamim as well, for those who were here on time. We started with Divrei Hayamim, we moved to Ezra, now we're on to Nehemiah. But it's okay, it's never too late. You can read it at home. Okay, it's all translated. The original is Aramaic, a mixture of Aramaic and Hebrew. The book of Nehemiah starts page 1428. The words of Nehemiah, son of Chachaliah, came to pass in the month of Kislev, 20th year, as I was in Shushan, the palace. Again, we're still in the Persian era. And Hanani, one of my brethren, came, certain men of Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped, what's going on there in Jerusalem? He was maybe he lived in New York. Okay, maybe Nehemiah was in New York, Shushan. And he's asking, how are the Jews doing in Israel? How are those Zionists? How are they making out? They're supposed to be building the temple. They're supposed to, Ezra, And they tell him the story, everything, how we're having trouble with mixed marriages, and we're having trouble. So what happened was, I went to the king in chapter 2, and Nehemiah was really taken by this horrible report. And the king said to me in chapter 2, verse 2, "Why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of the heart." And I was very sore afraid. And I said unto the king, "Let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste? The gates thereof are consumed with fire. How can I be happy when my city, Jerusalem, my people in Israel are having a hard time?" And so the king said to me, "What dost thou make request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said unto the king, "If it please the king, if thy servant find favor in thy sight, thou would send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it." And the king said unto me, "How long? You want a leave of absence?" Okay. You want to leave being a minister in the capitals of Persia, and you want to actually go to Jerusalem? How long do you want an appointment for? So I set him a time, the end of verse 6, and I said to the king, in verse 7, "Let letters be given to the government, that I may convey over until I come to Judah. I want to come with approval." And they gave him letters, and I rose. So I came to Jerusalem in verse 11, and he tried to do what he could to take. He joined Ezra in the leadership, and they tried to strengthen up the building of the city of Jerusalem. I'm going to skip ahead, and all the different parts of the fountains and the gates and the different areas all around Jerusalem, how they built it up. Nehemiah really did a good job. And it was a tough fight, but they got the job done. With Nehemiah, we have a recording of his prayers. And the end, wait, this book seems, my copy here has an extra. Book of Ezra. That's strange. I have, the pages are repeated in this volume.
A lot of the books that we have in this room are like that because we had acquired lemons.
Apparently,
We acquired lemons at a discount. So
this is, no, I think we probably got them for free. But anyways, this is just confusing, this part of the book. So I need another one. Can you hand me another one, please? This one is should be sent. Just going to put it aside.
Huh? What?
Let's see. Everybody have what? No. Thank you. So we're going to, here, this book is proper. Okay. And Nehemiah is trying to go to chapter 7. Finally, the wall is built. He set up the doors, and the singers at the door. And you have the same problem? Take another volume. There should be. Anyways, then there's lists of all the people. And then they gathered. Now I want to go to chapter 8. Chapter 8 is really the most important chapter that we're going to look at today. Because when Ezra and Nehemiah came up and they led the Jewish people, not only did they physically build Jerusalem, but we mentioned before that they made sure that the Jews were getting rid of the foreign wives. Let's take a look at chapter 8. They made this following gathering. And all the people gathered themselves together. Ariel, will you read for us?
8.
Page 1442.
And all the people gathered themselves together as one man into the street that was before the water gate, and they
Spake. It's old Hebrew for spoke. Old English, yeah.
spake spake unto Ezra, the scribe, to bring the book of the law of Moshe, which the Lord had commanded.
Okay, so they have a public reading of the Torah. Go ahead.
And Ezra the priest brought the law before the congregation, before both of men and women, and all that could hear with understanding, upon the first day of the 7th month. And he read therein before the street that was before the water gate from the morning until midday, before the men and women, and those that could understand, and the ears of all the people were attentive unto the book of the law. And Ezra the scribe stood up upon a pulpit of wood, which they had made for the purpose, and beside him stood Mattithiah.
Okay, you don't have to read the names of all the people that are with him.
On his right hand.
Go ahead, verse 5.
And Ezra opened the book in the sight of all the people, for he was above all the people. And when he opened it, all the people stood up.
What does this sound like to you? Close.
Guitar reading.
Or
Torah, when we
Hagbah. Hagbah. Sounds like Hagbah. He lifted it up for all the people to see. Right? Okay. And Ezra blessed the people.
And Ezra blessed the Lord,
Yeah, go ahead.
the great God, and all the people answered, Amen.
Makes sense. Amen, amen. And lifting up their hands, and they bowed their heads and worshipped the Lord with their faces to the ground. So this was a spiritual revival. We have the names of the other people here that were with him. Yeshua, Bani, Sherevia, Yamin, Achub, Shabtai, Hodia, Masya, Klita, Azariah, Yozava, Hanan, Pelaya, Halvim, Vinim, Ta'am. What are they doing? Cause the people to understand the law. At the end of verse 7, page 1443. And the people stood in their place. So they read in the book of law. Here it is, verse 8.
So they read in the book of the law of God distinctly, and gave the sense and caused them to understand the reading.
So what were they doing there? What were they doing there?
Studying.
Translating. More than that.
Yes.
Explaining. They were learning. That's right. They were learning Torah. That's it. They that's right. Lots of commentary. The Hebrew is meforash, som sechel, gave sense, caused them to understand. They were teaching Torah. Ezra and all of the people were there trying to read the book and understanding it. And Nehemiah, go ahead.
And Nehemiah, which is the Tirshata, and Ezra the priest, the scribe, and the Levites.
He had another name. He had a Persian name, Hatirshata. Okay.
And Ezra the priest, the scribe, and the Levites that taught the people, said unto all the people, This day is holy unto the Lord your God. Mourn not, nor weep. For all the people wept when they heard the word of the Lord.
Why did they weep? Why did they weep? Sometimes when I give shir, people start to cry. I don't know why. Maybe it's too long? What do you think? Why were they crying when they heard the law?
Joy.
Joy, yafeh, possible. But now he's telling them, don't cry.
Because they're ashamed.
They're ashamed. We haven't been doing that. We haven't been keeping the laws of the Torah. It's a possible explanation. So, but Nehemiah says, no, I don't want you to be sad today. Even though you're learning things and you need to do tshuva, I don't want you to be sad. Go your way. Go ahead, verse 10.
But wait, Nehemiah said, don't be sad and don't cry, and
That's right.
Then they just wept, like they cried after he...
No. He explains why he told them not to cry, because they were crying. And then what did Nehemiah say to them? Comes in verse 10.
For all.
Yeah, for they were crying, yes. So verse 10 says,
Then he said unto them, Go your way, eat the fat and eat the sweet, and send portions unto them for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy unto your Lord, neither be ye sorry, for the joy of the Lord is your strength.
joy of the Lord is your strength. You got to be happy when you serve the Lord. You're going to be strong when you're joyous. Ye. So what day is this, by the way? In our tradition, we have the date. Rosh Hashanah Yafeh. So the Levites stilled all the people, saying, hold your peace, the day is holy, neither be ye grieved, don't be sad, go eat and drink, have a party. And then the second day, the day after Rosh Hashanah, on verse 13, they gathered together the chief of the fathers of all the people, the priests, the Levites, and to Ezra, even to understand the words of the law. Again, we're we're learning Torah. This is the founding of the first yeshiva, okay? And they found written in the law, which the Lord commanded, that the children of Israel should dwell in the booths, the feast of the 7th month. And so they have the holiday right after Rosh Hashanah, of course, is Sukkot, and they celebrate Sukkot in a way which was never celebrated before. Unbelievable. They had an amazing holiday. And then chapter 11, skip ahead, chapter 11, after the holiday is over, is the 24th day of this month. Now the party's over. They go into their sackcloth and mourning. Why? Because they realize they have to separate from their foreign wives, and they do tshuva for their sins. And again, they're reading, verse 3, they stood up in their place. I'm in chapter 9, verse 3. They stood up, it's on page 1444 if you have this book. They stood up in their place and read in the book of the law of the God 1/4 part of the day, another 4th part they confessed and worshipped. So they had learning, they had davening, they had tshuva, and they stood up on the stairs all the people, and it was quite a religious revival. And he goes through the history of what happened. We were in Sinai and we were exiled because we sinned, and now God is having mercy on us and we're coming back, so we better shape up. We better get into ship shape and do better. Skip to chapter 10, please. Skip to chapter 10.
Can I have a question?
Yeah, please, question, yeah.
Yeah, it's mentioned, it kind of struck me because I was thinking why they say that they build a wooden thing under.
It's a shire.
No more than that. In Hebrew, it's called a migdal, which is a tower. It was some kind of a high place. You can imagine they had no loudspeakers, so you had to be heard as was showing and seen. So it was a high place. Some kind of something like a bima, even higher than that.
It's again repeated that wooden state of Levites. And
that's right.
That's what we have in the synagogue in the middle.
That's similar. That's called the bima.
Like
similar, yes. I imagine that one was a little bit larger and higher and it was outdoors also. In any case, all right. So, anyways, the Jewish people are doing tshuva, and they make at the chapter 10. Skip to chapter 10 on page 1447. And because of all this, we make a covenant and write it. Princes, Levites, and priests seal unto it. And they actually made a pact. We could call it the Declaration of Independence, if you will, or the renewal of the covenant. And there's the names of all the people that were signed on it. And what do they do? What do they sign? And they to give strength, to make sure that if you look on verse 32, to make sure that they, one of the things Nehemiah was very upset about, right? We mentioned that Ezra was all upset about the people who had their foreign wives. Nehemiah speaks about keeping Shabbat, make sure that nobody brings their merchandise to sell on Shabbat. And of course, the temple service in verse 34, like in last week's parsha, the showbread, continual meal offering, and the continual burnt offering, the Shabbat, the new moons, the set feasts, and they really set up the system to bring the first fruits. All of the laws of the Torah that we're familiar with, bringing the trumot, maasrot, etc., they came and they really set up a system in Jerusalem the Second Temple era. And then there's lists of the names of the Kohanim, the names of the Leviim, and we're going to skip all that. And we have more problems with the foreign wives. And in chapter 13, they keep dealing with the same thing until the book is over at the end of chapter 13. And that's the beginning of the Second Temple period. It's what we covered so far this morning. Okay? Now, so we have Ezra. Now I want you to open up Pirkei Avot. So far, comments, questions about what we read so far? Divrei Yamim, Ezra, Nehemiah. Wow, we covered a lot of ground in this half an hour. You can. Any questions, comments? Yeah?
Completely irrelevant question, but do I have to say Shekinah because this is brand new?
You may, you don't have to, but if you feel joyous upon using it for the first time, by all means, you're allowed to. Okay, good. Siddur too? Okay, amazing. It's good to use the books that you buy. It's exciting, yes. In the ancient times... Okay, fine. He has one here, but he wants to use his own. He's excited to use his own. It's fine.
Because I studied for Bible, so
okay, good. So
that means that if as we see now, it's like when they establish all of those things when they come back. It's almost similar, like we came back here now after 2,000 years, and we're establishing also some.
Sure. We created a whole new system of government, and but the religious revival, we're also trying to reestablish the laws of the Torah as our laws. Of course, it's much more complicated because 200 years ago, many of the Jewish people lost contact with their traditions, and a much smaller percentage of the people are keeping the Torah and the mitzvot. So,
but it's happening
slowly. Yes, there is a revival, no question.
How many years it takes to altogether to rebuild Jerusalem, the second temple?
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. But definitely this was the beginning, and we know it lasted for 420 years, they say, according to the secular historians. If we start at minus 516, right, because we said that they say the destruction was at minus 586, 70 years later is minus 516, and then we go all the way till year 70. So how many is that? 586 years. So that's longer than 420. Traditional count is 410 and 420, but approximately 500 years without getting into that. We're not historians here. We're not trying to figure out the precise dates. But it is a nice big period. That's the yellow period that we're going to fill in soon. The yellow period, the second temple period. Today. That's what we're doing. That's why we're here. Yeah. Baruch Hashem. So this is the second temple period. We have the leadership of Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, Ben Shaltiel, Yeshua, and the Levites and the priests, and they had a lot of struggles building up the system. Boker Tov. Okay, we're gonna now open up Pirkei Avot. Pass one over for Michael. We're going to hear a similar, but a little bit different history of the tradition of the Jewish people. Chapter 1, Mishnah 1. By the way,
Chapter 1.
Mishnah is a collection from Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, year 200, in the next period, 500 years later. But we have this following tradition. This is the first time it was recorded. Perhaps it was an older Mishnah, and it starts as follows. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Everybody see where I'm reading? Moshe kibel Torah miSinai u'msara leYeshua. Chapter 1, Mishnah 1. Are you sure you're on chapter 1, Mishnah 1? It starts with Moshe. Chapter 1, Mishnah 1.
Yep. The first chapter.
Moshe received the Torah from Sinai. U'masara leYehoshua. I remember Moshe and Yoshua. They're in the red zone, right? Moshe and Yoshua. U'masara leZkenim. Zkenim, they were elders. Remember the elders? Book of Bamidbar. It's coming up soon. We're going to read about the 70 elders. But there were elders after Yoshua as well. Yoshua Zkenim leNeviim. Nevi'im, prophets. We've been talking about the prophets in the orange period, the period of the first temple, right? All the prophets. What do we have there? We have prophets. Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, right? Tzfanya, lots of prophets. Zkenim u'Nevi'im. And after we get to that era, now we're coming to our era, the Anshei Knesset HaGdolah. the Nevi'im transmitted the Torah that they received from Moshe, from Yeshua, from the Zakanim, to who? To the members of the Great Assembly. When did they live? Yes?
I have a question. Who wrote, who composed it?
Good question. All of the Mishnah we attribute to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. It's part of the Mishnah. This is part of the 6 orders of the Mishnah. At the end of Nezikin. Excellent.
It's the last.
Yes. Yes.
Nezikin.
Well, some people say Horayot comes afterwards, but it's at the end. It's the latter part of Nezikin. It's part of the 6 orders of the Mishnah. Correct. Pirkei Avot. It's different, very different than most of the 6 orders of the Mishnah. In what way is it different?
This is more philosophy.
Right.
Or
Is that what you were going to say also?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right?
As far as I know, and I read this in a Sidur, old Sidur, that Pirkei Avos is the only, more or less complete work that is represented fully in a Sidur. So you don't see all of Tehillim often represented in a Sidur, and you almost never see all of the Torah represented in a Sidur. But almost every Sidur that's printed.
Why is that, Moshe? Why is that? The Mishnah should be in the Book of Mishnah, not in the Sidur.
One of the following chapters is read each Shabbat after Pesach until the Shabbat before Rosh Hashanah. Last week Before Rosh Hashanah, 2 chapters are read.
Wait, what period are we in now? When is it usually read?
Right now.
Right now.
Between Pesach and Shavuot, which is what we're in. How many weeks are there between Pesach and Shavuot?
7.
7 weeks. And how many chapters are there in the Pirkei Avot, the chapters of our fathers, as it's called?
7.
There's actually 6. The truth is, there's actually 5, and a 6th was added. But so there's always a question. The last Shabbat, there's not always 7 Shabbatot. Sometimes there's only 6 Shabbatot in between, right? Because Pesach's in the middle of the week, and Shavuot can be in the middle of the week. So it could be you only have 6 Shabbatot. This year, actually, in Israel, for sure, we have 7 Shabbatot.
For Galut is 6, right? Because
For Galut, it's 6. Because they're behind one. That's right. It's a little bit confusing. In any case, the custom developed that we actually recite, study, ponder, think about this Masechet Pirkei Avot. It's called the Masechet during this period of the year. And you're right. This is very different. Most of the other parts of the Mishnah, the 6 orders of the Mishnah, which we'll discuss later, most of them are halachic in nature. It's all sorts of the laws of Shabbat and the laws of Kashrut and the laws of all the laws of the Torah were rewritten in a different system of 6 orders. But Pirkei Avot is primarily ethics. It's many times translated as not the chapters of our fathers, like the words means Pirkei Avot, but rather ethics of our fathers, because it's all about ethics and many words of wisdom, guidance for life. And we'll see that the 6th chapter, though, is different. It's really not part of the original Mishnah. 5 chapters was the original. 6th was added. The 6th talks about, anybody know what the 6th chapter talks about in particular? The 6th chapter is all about, it's the last one we read before Shavuot. It's all about Torah. It's all about Torah, studying Torah, and how great it is, and how to approach it, and what things you need in order to achieve success in Torah. It might be a good chapter to peruse if you're studying in yeshiva, trying to learn Torah all day and all night, right? So the 6th chapter is all about how to conquer Torah. It's actually called a Breita. Breita is, the word bar means, it's Aramaic. There's an additional meaning to the word bar.
Breita is.
What does bar mean? It means outside. Milagav is inside, lago is inside, and bar is outside. So what's a Breita? It's an outside source. It's not originally part of the Mishnah. There were other collections, other works, other statements of the law, which didn't make it into the collection of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, and so they're all called Breita. The Breitot in plural, Breita in singular, and this 6th chapter is actually a Breita. It's called the Breita, called Kinyan Torah, about how to acquire Torah. And but it's put in here because it's, of course, very important, and it helps with the cycle of reading 1 chapter a week When do we usually read this chapter of Pirkei Avot? We said this time period between Pesach and Shavuot, but when? Good, Shabbat after Mincha. That's why. Where does it appear in your Siddur, Moshe?
Mincha for Shabbos.
That's right after Mincha of Shabbat. Most Siddurim have the entire Pirkei Avot, the 6 chapters of the Pirkei Avot. For this period of the year, some people continue even after Shavuot, and they recite 1 chapter a week after Mincha and Shabbat. Shabbat afternoon, after Mincha. Make sure you use your time well. Other people stop learning Pirkei Avot and they instead read the Tehillim. Many Siddurim have the Shir HaMa'alot, the songs of the ascents. There's 15 of them that start with Shir HaMa'alot or Shir La Ma'alot. It's a series in the Tehillim. It's 120. It starts with 120 or 119, and it goes through to 135 in the Book of Tehillim. That also appears in the Siddur, and the Barchi Nafshi. Barchi Nafshi is Tehillim 104, also traditionally read after Mincha and Shabbat, and that's why it's in the Siddur, usually most Siddurim after there. And so let's get back to Pirkei Avot. Okay? Pirkei Avot is always a good place to start. Each Mishnah, that's part of the Mishnah, so each one is called a Mishnah. Chapter 6 should be called a Breita, but it's parallel to Mishnah. Mishnah is part of the 6 orders of the Mishnah. Breita is outside, when it's not part of the 6 orders of the Mishnah. So each Mishnah, as it's pretty much standalone. It has an idea, it has an ethical exhortation, it tells you a message. Many times there's a few messages, and that's why it's a beautiful thing to study. Yes?
It reminds me kind of Mishlei.
Good, it is similar. But, of course, Mishlei is in the Tanakh. It's the previous period, right? Period 1 and period 2, right? All the Tanakh is pretty much finished up in period the red and the orange, right? Now we're talking about what happens after the red and the orange period, what happens in the period of the Second Temple. So let's go back to our first Mishnah. Yes, Moshe?
Okay. Might be a stupid question, but the Mishnah was received by Moshe at Sinai. So shouldn't we be including the Mishnah where we include the Torah?
Ah,
Even
good.
though it was only written down later, but we assume that as it was written in the same way that it was received.
Good, I like your question. Moshe,
The Mishnah was never meant to be written down.
It was never meant to be written down.
It was never meant
But the concepts of it originate at Sinai.
Yeah, it was never meant to be written
So
down.
should we
Therefore,
include
it has,
the Mishnah
it has no
where we include the Torah?
place in the Tanakh itself. It was never meant to be written
I know it was not meant to be written down, but it's the concepts of it originate.
let me address.
That's the entire Jewish.
That's it. Let me address Moshe's question. It was worded in a curious and a cute way, but the question is based on a tradition that we
Why
have.
do you think I'm cute?
That's right. It's better than the opposite, right? Moshe is assuming what we have a tradition that says that all of our words of Torah in this classroom today, all of the words of Torah throughout the generations really originate at Mount Sinai. If you say it in an extreme way, the words that I'm saying right now were said from God to Moshe at Sinai. What is this statement trying to say? Is that we're part of a chain. And all the words of the Torah that we develop up until today, every generation adds more and more understanding of the Torah. It's really just an elaboration of what God told to Moshe. And so if you take this to the extreme, you say, well, how come the shir that's now being recorded on YouTube and being put on the internet, why isn't that part of the Tanakh? Right? Why isn't it part of the Tanakh? Everything should be part of what God said to Moshe. Yeah, that's fine. Everything's fine. I didn't say it wasn't. I said it is.
I did, it wasn't.
No, it is. That is being recorded. So every word that we say of Torah should be part of the 5 books of Moses. That's essentially what Moshe was asking. But you understand, Moshe, why I said you were cute. Because obviously that's a cute question. This is a spiritual principle that, of course, all the words of Torah are a continuation of the Torah of Moshe that he got from Sinai. But it's really extreme. There are some positions like that. There are some people that say that every word of the 6 orders of the Mishnah written in the 4th green era, almost 2,000 years after Sinai, actually that was word for word what Moshe heard from Sinai, and he passed on to Yoshua, and Yoshua to the Zkanim, the Zkanim to the Nevi'im. Most people assume that not all of every word that we say today, or every word that was said 1,000 years out in the Mishnah, not all of them were word for word given. Like when it says Rabbi Yoshua said this, and Rabbi Eliezer says this, and Rabbi Shimon says that. Did God said to Moshe, Rabbi Shimon's going to say this, and Rabbi Yoshua is going to say that? Could be. There's some extreme positions that hold that. I'd say the majority of people don't understand it to be a literal statement, that every word in the Mishnah was said to Moshe at Sinai. But the principle, of course, is very powerful and very true, that we're not just making stuff up. Well, this is one long chain, right? The red, orange, yellow, green. The Mishnah comes in the green section. We're going to come back to the yellow. I'll explain to you why. I'm starting with the Mishnah now, even though the Mishnah was written in the green section. In the period of the sages, it's all part of the same chain. That's exactly what we just read in chapter 1, Mishnah 1 of Pirkei Avot. Okay, does that answer your question? That, of course, the words, maybe, the truth is I believe that some Mishnayot are very ancient. Some formulations, the words themselves, it makes sense that they were passed down orally, as we all know. David and Moshe got into discussion. Well, it was supposed to be oral versus written. There were a lot of oral traditions which were not written down until the time of the green period, the time of the sages. They're not written down. The Torah, it was prohibited to write down oral Torah. And so some of the formulations actually were, it could be word for word from Moshe, but we don't know which. And I assume not all, because that would include, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Eliezer, who lived 1,000 years later. It's just too strange. It could be prophecy. Anything could happen with prophecy. But I think the more natural way of understanding is that this principle that you're mentioning, Moshe, correctly, is that it's all part of the Torah of Moshe, and that's what our Mishnah is telling us. It's all connected as part of the chain that was passed down. Moshe kibel Torah b'Sinai. Moshe received the Torah and passed it on to the Zkanim, to Yoshua, and Yoshua to the Zkanim, Zkanim to the Nevi'im, and this is all part of one long chain. Not necessarily that every word literally is part of because then it would be the same book. It would be in the Tanakh. Everything would be in the Tanakh. As I said, today's lecture would be in the Tanakh. The Talmud would be part of the Tanakh. No, but we have different collections of the oral traditions which were written down over the years. So we're talking about now 1,000 years later. Okay, so let's finish it up though. Let's go back to chapter 1, Mishnah 1. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai and gave it to Yoshua. Yoshua to the elders. The elders to the prophets. And the prophets passed it on to men of the great assembly. Who are the men of the great assembly and when did they live? Not necessarily. Oh, sorry. So what do you say? Very good, Micha. What did you say at the same time? Anshe Knesset Agdola. So who are they? What do we know about them?
Established by Moshe?
No, couldn't be. So many years after. If it's after the Nevi'im, what period are we talking about? The period we're looking for right now. Second Temple period, the yellow period. Anshe Knesset, men of the great assembly. What did Michael tell us? Who are some of the famous members of this great assembly? Ezra. We just read the Book of Ezra. So we're right here, we're on the seam between the book of the Tanakh and the yellow period, which we don't have a book from the Second Temple period. And the Mishnah that we're reading from Pirkei Avot comes from the green period later. But we're talking about what the men of the great assembly did. So who were they? Ezra? Who else?
Shimon ben Satach.
Shimon ben Shetach is the last one. We're going to get to him. That's at the end, the very end. You just you put 500 years together. Ezra was at the beginning of 500 years. Shimon ben Shetach is towards the end of the 500 years. Zerubbabel, all the people we mentioned. Right? Nehemiah, good. Mordechai, good. We mentioned him. Shimon HaTzadik, that's at the end. That's what he's mentioning. That's really at the end of the 500 years. So the answer to answer my own question, what do we know about this men of the Great Assembly? This Great Assembly? What else do you know?
I know, like, they came in a special time because in that time prophecy stopped. There was no prophecy anymore.
Right.
So they had to think and to adapt to the new culture and how
That's
to
right.
make Kedusha in the house of the people and make Torah.
Right. What was it, Ezra? We just read about the Book of Ezra. They had this great gathering. What were they doing? Teaching, explaining to the people the Torah. They were transmitting the Torah down. This is Torah study. It's not prophecy any longer. They're not standing and giving them prophecy. Repent. Because in 40 days, Nineveh will be destroyed if you do not repent. Right? This is the language of the prophets, which we had in the Tanakh. All of a sudden here, it's the beginning of a new era. We're studying Torah. Ezra is the scribe. Scribe writes the books. So the truth is, Ezra was involved in they say that Ezra was such a great figure, as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. Because Moshe got the Torah from Sinai, gave it to the Jewish people. What did Ezra do? Ezra taught the Torah to the people. In the time of Ezra, again, we're in the yellow period. We're gonna fill in our wall soon. This is there's a midrash, it says in the Talmud that Ezra came from Bavel and he found 3 books. Or maybe he brought with him books. There were books in the courtyard of the temple. Now, I'm not sure which temple, because the temple didn't exist. He was building the temple, they were building the temple. Anyways, the remnants that came back, a very small amount. What did we read? 42,360? What was it? Something like that?
42,603.
603. But there's other counts as well. It gets counted again in Divrei Yamim. But whatever it is, the group that came, and then there was a second wave with Nehemiah, right? And so however many they were, they had, what did they bring with them? From Bavel? What did they bring from Babylon? Gold and silver, what else? And some of the vessels. In Koresh, it says the Koresh gave the vessels. So maybe they brought up, Talmud says as follows, they had 3 books of the Torah.
3 Torah scrolls.
3 Torah scrolls.
Full Torah scrolls.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. And what did Ezra do? Ezra, the scribe,
He made another one.
Copy.
says that he studied, and this is what he was doing. He was such a scholar, and he corrected, came up with the standard edition of the Torah. Why? Because he read the 3 versions, which they had, and there were some differences. And he says that, he decided whenever there was a difference, 2 out of 3 wins. Right? He followed the majority. We're supposed to follow the majority of the Torah. And so he put together the actual text of the Torah, the standard text. He standardized the text from the different versions. Apparently there were some different changes here and there. If you notice, one of the explanations is, in the Chumash, every once in a while, you may have noticed that there's dots some on top of the letters. Have you ever seen that before? There's some words that have dots on the top, not everywhere, but there's I think 30 places or something like that. Or maybe even less, I'm not sure. But those dots, some explanations are, this is when Ezra had a debate. He wasn't sure. And so he made a mark. It's like a footnote. Make a mark. This is the text that I'm giving you, but I'm not sure that this is the absolute correct word. Anyways, from that time, yes?
Actually, you are doing the same like Ezra did.
Like
Ezra did. To educate us and...
I try. Thank you. I wish. Ezra, so what we're talking about now, that more than just educating the people and teaching them and explaining things to them, he also canonized the Bible. The books of the Bible, all the books, not only the Sefer Torah, the book of Yoshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, Melachim. Our tradition tells us they were written by Shmuel. Shmuel was written by Shmuel. Yoshua was written by Yoshua, etc. And then Yeshayahu, prophecies of Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, all those prophets of the Orange Era, right? All the prophets of the Orange Era, of the First Temple time. There were many, many prophets. We know their names. Their books, their prophecies were given. Ezra took them all, finalized the text, and said, okay, these books go into the Tanakh. They make it into the Bible. And these books, there were other prophets, they don't make it in. He decided these were not written with Ruach HaKodesh. Perhaps they didn't have the prophecy, the level of divine assistance which was necessary. Ezra canonized. It's hard to say that he wrote the Tanakh, but he's called a scribe. I say that he canonized. He canonized it. Became canon. He made all of the previous eras, the Chumash, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. He sealed it. He put it together in a book. He said, "This is our Bible." And then he explained it and taught it to the Jewish people. So this is all at the beginning of the Second Temple period, right? Ezra, Nehemiah, this is what they're doing. And then now we're hearing, wait, there's a new group. Ezra was not alone. Nehemiah and whatever the list is, Yoshua and all those other names of people, it was actually part of an institution called the Great Assembly. Now, we haven't said much because the real answer to my question is, what do we know about this Great Assembly? The answer is, we don't know too much about it. How many were there? Hirsch wants to ask a question.
So the first 5 chapters of the book are from...
Of what? Sorry? Pirkei Avot, yes.
Pirkei Avot, so everyone said.
Yeah, and I didn't hear you.
The 5 chapters are from the Mishnah, and then the 6th one is...
It's a Breita. Yeah.
And there's only 6 of these chapters?
Only 6 chapters, yes. Anyway, back to our question. So what do we know? What do we know about the Great Assembly? So it's interesting. David said this before, that in our minds, the group that leads the Jewish people, we have this word, the Sanhedrin. Right? We know there's a court of 3, there's a court of 21, and then there's a court of 70, and there's a court of, court of 70, that's what the Sanhedrin was. Sanhedrin is actually a Greek word, so it stands to reason that it was used much later. This is the Persian era. Right? This is not called Sanhedrin, it's called Knesset HaGdolah, the Great Assembly. It could be that the Sanhedrin later on was an outgrowth from the Knesset HaGdolah, but as you can see here, also the Sanhedrin, usually we assume that it's used for adjudicating cases of law. This is much more political leadership and...
so like our Knesset today, more or less.
That's right.
The nation with the Torah.
Well, much more Torah, right? Much more Torah. But absolutely, their political leadership. How many members are there in the Knesset today? Too many. Some people say not enough. Some people say too many. How many members of Knesset are there today?
130.
120. Why? Wait, how'd they choose that number?
It's the same number as the Sanhedrin.
They pattern it after Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. Our tradition tells us, one of the few things we know about it is that there were 120 members. And so today, when they established the state of Israel, they said our parliament should have 120 members, and we're going to call the parliament the Knesset, just like the members of the great Knesset HaGdolah in the time 2,000 years ago.
Knesset just sort of means like
Assembly.
The word means assembly, yeah, assembly. Men of the Great Assembly, right, assembly.
I mean, how else would you translate parliament?
Many words you could choose. You could choose Memshalah, you could choose Malchut, there's many words. You could choose Sanhedrin, they could have called it Sanhedrin. They chose Knesset.
I have a question about...
Yeah.
We have the elders, what the Moshe was establishing, these elders of the tribes.
The concept of having 70 elders goes back to the Chumash, good point. That's right, elders, the Kenim.
They disappear in time of Babylonia, and then they start to when they come here back, when we come back and build the second temple, then is like trying to reestablish this concept, and then
I believe so. I believe so. It's definitely a concept of leadership. It's a form of leadership, but it's something we haven't heard about before. We have heard about the elders, and they were part of the chain, right? Moshe, Yoshua, the elders. Yeah, there was elders even in the time of the Moshe at the same time. But then when we come to the Second Temple period, the yellow period now, all of a sudden we hear about this new body, governing body, that's called the Great Assembly. And we say that members of the Great Assembly, the first members, were prophets. They're on the border, they're on the seam. From the first temple, the leftover prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. No, Yirmiyahu, I doubt it. Yirmiyahu is at the end, we're not quite sure. End of the first temple period. The 70 years later, I assume that Yirmiyahu was not around. But the other prophets, of course, Ezra and Nehemiah, we just read for them from the Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, and Mordechai. These are all figures which appear in the Tanakh, but really they're on the border, and they were the beginning of this next governing body called the Great Assembly. Yeah.
So the question, it says in the Torah that Moshe reminded us that we should have the Sanhedrin, like a great assembly. And I think they use the number 70.
70.
And
right. The name Sanhedrin was given later. The Zakenim, they're called Zakenim. That's what Amos was saying. And in the Torah, the idea of Zakenim, the elders. What was the job of the elders? It's also a little vague.
The assembly is not the same as the great assembly, like in what they basically did.
It's similar. They're definitely leadership.
Yeah.
But the definitions between political leadership and religious leadership and Torah scholarship and legal leadership, it's hard to make those, we're very clear now. We have the judiciary and we've got the government, and there's two separate, what's that called? Branches of government. We have
branches of government.
Separation of powers, right? We talk about in the democratic era.
When I was growing up, they were called the three branches.
The three branches.
Yeah.
Right. The judiciary, legislation, and executive. Right.
I don't really understand.
Right. So, but in those days, it was all. We don't have that clear definition. Soon, we're going to get to a separation, which is a little bit similar, but it's all kind of vague. This is 2,000 years ago. We don't have the records of the minutes of the meetings of the members of the Great Assembly of Ezra and Nehemiah. The minutes we do have is what we read before, and soon I'm going to show you some of the latter end, the end of the 500-year period. Then we do have more and more who the leaders were of this Great Assembly and what they said. It's coming up right now in the coming few minutes. Okay, I'll take some questions. Somebody wanted to ask.
So, additional question.
Okay.
We're commanded to build to assembly Ziknim, like the 70 elders, like a Sanhedrin basically. But since we have if we would have another great assembly, like a Knesset, like we have today, if they would be also considered Torah and also dealing with those matters. Religious Knesset, basically.
Right.
Would we still need a Sanhedrin, additional 70 elders assembly or not?
Right. So it's a good question. We're not sure exactly how it's supposed to be. The concept of Sanhedrin later on became much more developed and legislated as well. There was special power of the 70. It's a Beit Din, so it's a religious leadership. Religious, of course, includes legal leadership, because our Torah is not just about Shabbat and Kashrut, it's also about civil law. And so this 70-member court that sat in the temple, the second temple, and perhaps there was a similar one in the first temple, this has a very special status in halakha, certain laws which can only be done by the Sanhedrin that's sitting in the temple. We see here the mix between the religious authority and the legal authority, and they're all connected in Judaism. And so we have laws about the Sanhedrin, and some people say today we should try to get back the Sanhedrin. There's only one problem.
We don't have actual rabbis, we don't have smicha, we don't have the red heifer, we don't have this, we don't have that.
You don't need the red heifer for having the Sanhedrin.
I know, but that's another thing people say.
Yeah, but that's something completely
I know,
different.
There are problems. The semicha is one problem, but the biggest problem, I believe, is that in order to have a Sanhedrin, we have to have the. No, we don't have to have a king. We have to have agreement.
Unity.
Who is going to be on the Sanhedrin? Can you imagine nowadays?
That's impossible. You just can't agree.
Everybody would consider themselves or their rabbi.
If you have like
We're so
high rabbis, like really wise, learned rabbis, and everybody is humble enough to say, okay, we're gonna
that would be great. That would be great, David. We're working for it. Some people say we should try, but it's just so splintered. Some people have tried. They tried actually a few years ago, about 20 years ago. I got a letter in the mail. I got an appointment to be a member of the Sanhedrin. They invited me to join. And I had a good laugh, but I didn't join. And the truth is, there was an attempt to start somewhere. And then, when more and more people join, so then the greater and greater rabbis will join when they see it's something serious. But it's really difficult. We need some centralized leadership, religious leadership. It'd be great. We're so splintered. We're so divided. We're so we don't have that nowadays. Yeah.
So, sorry, the third question is like let's split the difference between the Sanhedrin, the 70 elders, and the Great Assembly.
We don't know much about the Great Assembly. The Great Assembly is all we know is that the name, that there were 120 people. We know some of the names of the people that were in it, but exactly how they functioned, what laws, what procedures, what they actually did, it's kind of vague. It's all kind of vague. Sanhedrin comes later, and that we have a lot more definitions of what the Sanhedrin is. But then Sheikh Knesset Gula, so the yellow, Sanhedrin is green period, the sages. And Sheikh Knesset Gula is the second temple period, the yellow period, and that is more vague. Okay? Yes, Ariel.
It's also interesting to keep in mind that during the Second Temple period, Israel was under the rule of the Persian Empire.
So we have to discuss that. Yeah, it changed. 500 years, there was a lot of changes. We're going to have to get into those details, and that could affect how this Great Assembly, worked. How it could run. It depends on who the government is. A good point. Yes, Harsh.
It's very vague.
Mm-hmm.
Don't anywhere in the Talmud, don't commentators, those give the rush, don't they elaborate on?
A little bit. I've been teaching you just a little bit. Yeah. Because for them it was also 500 years earlier. What I've been telling you is all from the Talmud. And that's from the green period, but it's from 500 years earlier. So, or maybe a little less. We're going to learn more and more what we do know about the Knesset HaGdolah. That's our topic right now. Tomorrow, we're trying to get a handle of what happened in the Second Temple period, and we're going to cover the different governments as well. And so B'ezrat Hashem, obviously it's just a survey. You can study this for years, right? Second Temple era is fascinating history. A lot of stuff to talk about. But just to understand, in terms of the leadership, who's who. So we started off with Perk Aleph, Mishnah Aleph, Pirkei Avot. Let's go on a little further. Moshe Kibel Torah. Most people should know this Mishnah off by heart. Mishnah, the word Mishnah comes from the word to repeat, because originally it was oral law. These Mishnayot were Mishunan, which means to be repeated, recited off by heart. They didn't have books like we have now, printing press. Even the manuscripts were very rare, so you had to memorize things. This is the age of the Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. Hundreds of page books. They were all memorized. All memorized. So memorization was a big thing. Mishnah, the word means to repeat. So at least the first Mishnah, Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. Umsara Lehoshua. Yeshua, you see it inside if you don't know it off by heart. Yeshua Lizkinim. Uzkinim Lenevim. Uneviim Mesaruha Lanshei Knesset Hagdolah. They had a task that we've been describing it a little bit from the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, to translate the Torah, to teach the Torah, to instruct the people that are coming back into a whole new situation. They're trying to establish a a government, a temple, rebuild the city, rebuild the country. This is what they were involved in. And so they gave us some instruction. Heim amru shlosha dvarim. First instruction is, of course, they said many, many things over the course of hundreds of years. This Mishnah teaches us 3 things in their name. Heim amru shlosha dvarim. They taught us 3 things. Number 1 is, hevu metunim badim. Be deliberate in judgment. Slow, matun. Don't make rash decisions. Deliberate. Think of the different sides. It's a complex situation. What did we mention? The foreign wives, Shabbat, people from all over the world, different nations. Very complex situation. Don't be hasty to make judgment. That's the first thing. Second thing is, Hamidu Talmidim Arbeh. It's always a question of quantity versus quality. We should have lots and lots of students. Machon Meir, we try to assist everybody, even if people can't afford it. We try to give scholarships. We try to accept everybody. Very rare we kick somebody out. It happened a few weeks ago. There's exceptions. But in general, Hamidu Talmidim Arbeh. You have to have lots of students if you want to be teaching the Torah to the people. We got to get out there. Okay, next, third, Ha'asu siyag laTorah, make a fence around the Torah. You might have heard this many, many times before, that this is one of the functions of the rabbis, is to make sure that the Torah is kept. If you have to create a buffer, some kind of a protective. There's all sorts of laws and enactments made to make sure that you don't get even close to violating a Torah law.
And the modern times. Times change, you got to adapt.
Also, sure. That's right. More fences around fences. Yeah, that's right. It's complicated. In any case, this is all we have from the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah as a group, as a body. We're going to see, the next Mishnah says, Shimon HaTzadik Haya Mishiarei Knesset HaGdolah. Shimon, the what's his name? What do you call him?
Shimon the Just.
Shimon the Just, HaTzadik. Is that what your translation says? Simon the Just?
Simon the Just.
Like justice.
Exactly. Tzaddik, from Tzedek, right?
Just also Yesharim, right?
Yeah, also. You could call him, the Holy One. Somebody's a tzaddik today. How do you say that in English? Righteous. Simon the righteous. Yeah, that's what we would say. So Shimon the tzaddik, he was known as a righteous one. He was one of the last, here I have in my translation, survivors of the Great Assembly. What do you have? Survivors? Yeah.
Was one of the last survivors of the Great Assembly. Used to say
survivors. Okay.
Torah, worship.
Right. So he had his 3 things, and then skip ahead. We're not going to focus on exactly what he said. So we're talking about the end of the Great Assembly. Somehow it came into existence. We don't know too much about it, other than there were 120 people. Started with Ezra and Nehemiah and those last prophets, and they led the leadership during the Second Temple era. And then we find out that it ended. It ended. There was a remnant at the time of Shimon HaTzadik. When did Shimon HaTzadik live? So we actually know. This we already know.
0.
Minus 333. Approximately. Minus 300.
It was during the Asmonean.
So we're talking about the period of the Great Assembly was about 200 years. Minus 500 to minus 300. So that's why I say we don't know too much about it exactly, but we know that the beginning and the end. We know the members, and we know how many there were, and we know that they were part of establishing a lot of the laws, the fences around the Torah. For example, all of the shiurim, the Talmud says. Right, Hirsch, you asked, what does the Talmud say? It says that the shiurim, the measurements. How much matzah you have to eat? How big does the sukkah have to be? How big does a mikvah? How many liters of water in the mikvah? All these measurements, they say, came from Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. Another thing, brachot.
They wrote the Siddur.
Essentially, all the Siddur. That's right. The actual text that we recite, Brachot, Birkat Hamazon, the text. Well, they collected it. Some say that the second part comes from Yehoshua bin Nun. There was traditions, but they canonized it. So they formalized it. So Sidur essentially was founded during the period of the beginning of the Second Temple area. That's on Sheikh Nasrallah. Okay, Shimon HaTzadik comes at the end of the end. He says that he was of the remnants, and he was about minus 300. This is a parallel to what happened in minus 333. Who remembers? It's very easy to remember the year minus 333.
Was it the downfall of
Hanukkah,
Persian?
Yeah. Who conquered?
Alexander the Great.
Exactly. Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, the Greek Empire. From Persia to Greece. Okay?
What was the exact?
Minus 333. It's very easy to remember. 333. That's the usual number. Obviously, there's debates about all these numbers. It's a long time ago, right? But that's an easy to remember number. And that, the tradition tells us that when Alexander the Great, the mythic figure who was legendary with his swiftness, some people say he had wings, because he so quickly conquered the entire world. The entire Europe and the Middle East and Egypt and North Africa, everything was, and India even, all the way to India. So they say he was so quick that he had wings. He was a mythical figure, but he was a real person. He was a great conqueror, and he really destroyed all the other empires, the Persian Empire and the Egyptian Empire. And he took control over the entire, the Levant, the entire world that was known then. And tradition tells us, there's a story in the Talmud, that when he came to the land of Israel, what did the Jews do?
So
Who was the leader of the Jewish people when Alexander came? Great. Shimon HaTzadik.
Who was a Kohen?
They say that he put on his clothing of the Kohen Gadol, and he went out to greet Alexander. And the story is told that when Alexander saw him coming, he got off his horse and bowed down. All of his ministers, all of his generals say, "What's going on here? You don't bow down in front of anybody. You are the great empire, Alexander the Great." That's what he was called. Were you bowing down in front of some Jew, some old man with a white beard? He said, "I want to tell you something. This is really strange. But whenever I go out to battle, I have divine assistance. And the night before, I dream. And in my dreams, I see a vision of a man with a white beard and wearing this amazing wardrobe, and it's him." So he bowed down to him, and he said, wow, he realized that his success somehow was through divine power, and so of course he allowed the Second Temple to stand, and he allowed the Jewish people to continue their religion. And then we all know that Alexander died very quickly. I think at the age of 40 or something. 28?
Yeah.
Wow. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. A mythical conqueror of the entire world. By 28, he died. Wow. His empire was divided into 3 of his generals. Not sons, generals. 3 generals. One took Greece and European section. The other took Syria. 32? Thank you. Okay. And then the other general took the area of Syria and Lebanon and Iraq, Iran, and so forth, and that towards the east. And the third general took the Egypt and North Africa and that area. What falls right smack in the middle of all these 3 areas? Israel. Of course, we're always in the middle of things, right? So for the first 150 years approximately, till about year 150, minus 150. From minus 333 to minus 150 approximately, the land of Israel was under the control of the Egyptian. They're known as a Ptolemaic, right? The P is silent. Ptolemaic dynasty. So Ptolemaic dynasty, which is the Egyptian Greeks. They were Greeks. It was the Greek Empire, but the Egyptian leader.
Hellenized Egyptians.
Right? No, yeah, Cleopatra. I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but they are, but also like Alexander the Great was also Macedonian, and the whole dynasty in Egypt, they're all like Macedonian, Egyptian with Greeks.
In any case, after the first and during that first 150 years, the Egyptian Greeks were actually they continued the policy of their leader Alexander. They let the Jews be for the most part. As a matter of fact, sorry. It wasn't a king. It was the men of the Great Assembly, or the remnants of the Great Assembly, the Shimon HaTzadik, the leadership.
Came later.
That's later. That's later. Right now, it was basically they were vassals. They were under the leadership of the Greek Empire, the Egyptian Greek Empire, that third, and they were pretty tolerant of the religion, and the Jewish people could flourish. As a matter of fact, this is the time of the Greek philosophers. Right, Greek. So the philosophers, Aristotle, in that was in Athens, but there were connections, and the Greek leadership and the thinkers, they met the Jewish thinkers. These are Chazal, Shimon HaTzadik, and the people afterwards. We're going to talk to them. Some of them even have Greek names. There was actually a cross-pollination of sorts of ideas. Yeah, that's a Greek name, right? Yes, David. Yeah.
So there was a time when the Greeks forced the Jews to write down or to translate the.
Wait. Could be during the end of that period. So it wasn't all roses. You're saying already we know that. The Greeks they cared to be cultural and to understand the culture of the Jews, but they weren't always so nice, and they forced us to do certain things like translate the Torah, etc. But then, what happened at about minus 150? What happened?
The Syrian guy came.
That's it. The Syrian Greeks took over. Seleucids is the way it's said in English. Selvekim in Hebrew. The Seleucid Greeks took over the land of Israel. It was right in the middle, right? Between Egypt and Syria, right? So the land of Israel, for the first 150 years, they were under the Egyptian Greeks. Things were okay. Wasn't, as I said, perfect, but they allowed us to practice our religion. Along came, when the balance of power changed, and the Seleucid Greeks, the Syrian Greeks, they took over the land of Israel. They had a fellow called, what do we call the bad guy? Antiochus. Remember Antiochus? Epiphanes. There are many different names, but they started to, they wanted uniformity in their empire, and they forced everybody to become Greeks, culturally as well. Hellenistic era. Many Jews became Hellenists. This is when we finally, the Jews that revolted against the Hellenists, persecution, religious persecution. What do we call them?
Maccabees.
That's right. The Hasmoneans, the Maccabees. This is the Hanukkah story, right?
When I was little, I used to always confuse Antiochus and Ahasuerus. The names are similar. And
Yeah.
Hanukkah and Purim are similar.
Baruch Hashem, you've moved on.
Yes. I confuse other things.
That's right. We always have new things to confuse. So let's just quickly finish off. So Shimon HaTzadik and the other elders, they're living now in the time of the Greek Empire, the end of the Second Temple era. But there's two sections, two parts to that second part. The first 150 years, the latter 150 years under the Hasmonean rule. This is already, the Jewish people are in control again. The Maccabean revolt worked, but what happened was when the Jews were trying to have their own government during that Hellenistic period or the Hasmonean period, what happened? Who became powerful in the world? No longer was the Greek Empire running the world, but along came the Roman Empire. And now the Jewish people, the Hasmoneans, had to be friends if they wanted to have independent leadership, right? And we know Judah the Maccabee, he founded the state of Israel, second state of Israel. Right? Before that, they were under the Persian rule. They were allowed to have a temple. They were allowed to govern the locals, and maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Even under Alexander the Great, under the Greeks, under the Ptolemaic Greeks as well. And then we had to have this religious persecution, and so we revolted. The Hasmoneans actually established not only religious independence, but political independence. Mm-hmm. They tried. The Rambam wrote that for 200 years there was Jewish independence. How independent were we? We talked about this when we spoke about Yom Ha'atzmaut. People said, "Are we really independent?" And I said, compared to how we were underneath the Roman Empire, much more independent. We have. Of course, we want to go back to the total independence for sure, like in the time of David and Solomon. But in any case, this is the Second Temple era, the end of the Second Temple era. We're already under the Roman. We have some measure of independence, but it's the Roman Empire, which is sending their legions to Israel. And here we have lots and lots of discussions. And there's all sorts of groups of people that become Jewish, the Edomians. And one of the Edomians that became Jewish was very close to the Roman Empire, and he got them to appoint him as the leader of Judea. Who am I talking about? Herod. That's right. King Herod. He's called king. King underneath the Roman, right? He was the king of Judea, really for the sake of the Roman Empire. But he himself was a Jew. He was sort of a convert, part of the Edomian converts, and he was a ruthless leader. Even though he was Jewish, he really is an amazing builder, and we see the remnants of what he built till today, including the Kotel, right? All those, the Marat HaMachpelah, and of course, famously, my backyard, Herodian. Herodian was one of his palaces. There's also, many palaces around the country. In any case, Herod was the leader, and he did some terrible things, but he did some great things. One of the things he did, just to complete our story for today, what did he do? Built the temple. The temple's there for 500 years already. We just talked about the temple being built by Ezra and Nehemiah, right? Minus 516. Herod lived in minus 50.
Was it maybe just a basic structure of the temple?
So the second temple, for most of its years, for almost 500 years, 400 years, was very small. It was basic. We said that the elders, what were they doing when they they laid the foundations? They were crying. They were crying because what is this compared to the great temple of Solomon? They were crying. Along came King Herod, and he built up what we call today Temple Mount. We can see the construction that he did with the arches. He created a platform, which is, maybe 5 times the size of the original mountain of Moriah, where the small temple stood. He created a structure. Our sages say there was never such a beautiful structure in the entire world like the Second Temple. This is the revised Second Temple, the refurbished Second Temple is what the word I'm looking for. Amazing. And then he died about year 35. And the other Roman emperors, they sent other people to be in charge. The Jews liked them. They revolted. We all know that in the year 70, this great structure that he made only 70 years before, that was so beautiful that we can see the remnants of it today, the size of it and the structure. This Temple Mount that we're all talking about, this was created by Herod. Very quickly, it was destroyed in year 70. And that's the end of the Second Temple era. We have more to learn, but we ran out of time. We're going to continue and study more about this end of the Second Temple period, because really, this is a major transition between the yellow and the green periods. The periods of the sages, beginning here, right? We read the Mishnah. Mishnah is sages time period, but it starts, and this is the best place to start, at the end of chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Pirkei Avot. So we'll continue with this, Be'ezrat Hashem, tomorrow, and we'll even put it on the board, Be'ezrat Hashem. We'll put what we learned on the board, okay? Bevakasha. Toda.